You've probably heard about Stonehenge, the pyramids of Egypt, maybe even Angkor Wat. But right here in the American Midwest, less than 10 miles from modern-day St. Louis, Missouri, stands evidence of something equally mind-boggling and far less understood. We're talking about Cahokia, a sprawling pre-Columbian city that once housed more people than London did in the same era. At its peak around 1050 CE, between 10 and 20,000 souls lived, worked, worshipped, and died within its carefully planned boundaries. They built massive earthen pyramids, carved intricate shell ornaments, and established trade networks that stretched from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. Yet by 1350 CE, the entire civilization had vanished, leaving behind only silent mounds and a riddle that still haunts archaeologists today. What makes Cahokia truly bizarre isn't just its size or sudden collapse. It's a specific monument that once stood at the heart of the city's central plaza. Picture an enormous circle of red cedar posts, each one weighing several tons, arranged with astronomical precision to track the solstices and equinoxes. We call it Woodhenge today, though that name doesn't quite capture its strangeness. The builders erected not one, but 5 different versions of this timber circle over 2 centuries, each time moving and recalibrating the posts. Why? What cosmic clock were they trying to perfect? And here's where things get even stranger. Buried beneath one of these circles, archaeologists found something that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of Mississippian culture, a cache of copper tablets inscribed with symbols that don't match any known Native American writing system. For the next hour, we're diving deep into Cahokia's central mystery and then branching out to explore related enigmas across ancient North America. You'll hear about giant burial mounds that contain skeletons of unusual proportions, trace evidence of possible transoceanic contact centuries before Columbus, and discover why some researchers believe these ancient peoples possessed astronomical knowledge that rivals anything from the Old World. We're not here to sell you easy answers or wild conspiracy theories. Instead, we're going to walk through the evidence, examine competing theories, and let you draw your own conclusions. Because the truth is, despite decades of careful excavation and analysis, nobody can fully explain what happened at Cahokia or why its people built what they built. The answers are still out there, waiting beneath the cornfields and suburban parking lots of the American heartland. So buckle up. We're about to explore mysteries that will change how you think about ancient America. Stand at the center of what was once Cahokia's Grand Plaza on a clear spring morning, and you can still feel the weight of what stood here. Woodhenge, the massive timber circle that anchored this sacred space, consisted of 48 red cedar posts, arranged in a perfect circle measuring 410 feet in diameter. Each post stood roughly 20 feet tall and weighed between 2 and 3 tons. The Mississippian people who built it around 1000 Talon CE had no metal tools, no wheels, no draft animals. They felled these giants with stone axes, transported them miles from the nearest cedar groves using only human muscle and probably wooden rollers, then erected them in precisely calculated positions. The center post marked true north. Other key posts aligned perfectly with the sunrise on the summer and winter solstices. This wasn't decorative. This was a working astronomical observatory, calendar, and ceremonial center all rolled into one. But here's what keeps archaeologists up at night. They built it 5 times. Between 900 and 1100 CE, the Cahokians dismantled and rebuilt this circle 5 distinct times, each version slightly different in diameter and post placement. The first version, called Woodhenge Y, had only 24 posts. By Woodhenge III, they doubled that to 48 and increased the diameter substantially. Then came Woodhenge IV, which shifted the entire structure several meters to the west. Finally, Woodhenge V represented yet another recalibration. Why this obsessive rebuilding? Some archaeologists suggest they were correcting for precession, the gradual wobble of Earth's axis that shifts the position of stars and sunrise points over centuries. If true, that implies a level of astronomical sophistication we rarely credit to pre-Columbian Americans. The discovery that really sent shockwaves through academic circles came in 1967, during excavations beneath the post holes of Woodhenge III. Deep in the sterile subsoil, archaeologist Warren Wittry's team uncovered a stone-lined pit containing 7 copper tablets, each about 6 inches square and less than a quarter-inch thick. The copper itself wasn't surprising. Mississippian people traded extensively with groups near Lake Superior, who had access to pure native copper deposits. What stunned everyone were the markings etched into 4 of the 7 tablets. They showed geometric patterns, spirals, concentric circles, and what appeared to be highly stylized human or animal figures, arranged in sequences that suggested writing or notation rather than simple decoration. Here's where the controversy erupts. Most mainstream archaeologists argue these are just ceremonial engravings, symbolic representations with no linguistic content. They point out that no other Mississippian site has yielded anything resembling a true writing system, and isolated symbols don't make an alphabet. Fair enough, but a vocal minority of researchers, including the late epigrapher Barry Fell, argued the symbols bore uncanny similarities to Bronze Age writing systems from the Mediterranean, particularly Libyan and Iberian scripts. Fell published detailed comparisons in the 1970s, claiming he could read the tablets as star maps or ritual instructions. The academic establishment largely dismissed his work as pseudo-archaeology, noting that humans often create similar geometric forms independently, what scholars call convergent evolution. Still, for all the debunking, nobody has definitively explained what those tablets say or why they were buried beneath an astronomical monument. Carbon dating of organic material found with the tablets confirms they date to approximately 1050 CE, right in the middle of Cahokia's golden age. Spectrographic analysis of the copper shows it came from Michigan's Keweenaw Peninsula, 800 miles north, proof of the vast trade networks these people maintained. But the symbols themselves remain undeciphered. Were they a primitive writing system that never caught on? A code used only by elite astronomer priests? Or are the skeptics right, just pretty decorations with no deeper meaning? Adding to the mystery, oral traditions from several modern Native American tribes reference sky watchers, or sun priests, who once lived in a great city to the west. The Osage people, whose ancestors may have been connected to Cahokia, tell stories of ancient leaders who spoke with the sky and marked time with the stars. Could these legends preserve folk memory of the Woodhenge astronomers? Some tribal historians think so, though proving a direct cultural link across 7 centuries is nearly impossible. Now picture yourself as one of those astronomer priests, standing in the center of Woodhenge at dawn on the summer solstice. The first golden rays of sun break over the eastern horizon, streaming directly through the gap between 2 specific posts. Drums begin to pound from atop Monk's Mound, the massive pyramid that looms just to the east. Thousands of people fill the plaza, their faces turned toward you and the rising sun. You hold one of those copper tablets in your hands, running your fingers over the etched spirals that record something, knowledge, power, prophecy we can't say. In that moment, you're bridging earth and sky, past and future, human and divine. You're performing a role your society has perfected over generations, maintaining cosmic order through careful observation and ritual. What did they know that we've forgotten? We still don't know. The tablets sit in climate-controlled storage at the University of Illinois, occasionally brought out for new analysis as imaging technology improves. Every few years, someone proposes a fresh interpretation. None have stuck. The timber posts of Woodhenge rotted away centuries ago, though modern reconstructions help visitors visualize the scale. But the central question remains hauntingly open. What message were they trying to preserve, and why did they bury it beneath their most important monument? If Woodhenge was Cahokia's brain, then Monk's Mound was its beating heart. And what a heart it was! Rising 100 feet above the surrounding floodplain, covering 14 acres at its base, containing roughly 22 million cubic feet of earth, Monk's Mound stands as the largest prehistoric earthen structure north of Mexico. To put that in perspective, it's larger at the base than the Great Pyramid of Giza. The Mississippian people built it entirely by hand, one basket of dirt at a time, over the course of 2 centuries. Modern calculations suggest it required the labor of thousands of workers moving millions of tons of soil from nearby borrow pits. The precision is staggering. The mound has 4 distinct terraces, each level carefully engineered with different soil compositions to prevent slumping and erosion. Archaeological excavations have revealed that a massive wooden structure once crowned the summit, a building measuring 105 feet long by 48 feet wide, large enough to house elite residences, ceremonial chambers, and possibly the city's ruling council. Post holes indicate walls made of massive logs, probably covered with woven mats and plaster. This was the palace of Cahokia's paramount chief, or perhaps a temple where priests conducted rituals visible to the entire city below. From up there, you could see for miles across the American bottom, the rich floodplain where the Mississippi and Missouri rivers converge. You could watch canoes coming and going on the waterways, monitor the agricultural fields that fed the city, and quite literally look down on the 10,000 people who owed you allegiance. But Monk's Mound holds a secret that archaeologists only discovered in the 1960s, and it's bizarre enough to make you question everything you think you know about pre-Columbian engineering. Beneath the 4th terrace, about 50 feet below the current surface, lies an earlier structure, a sunken plaza, or possible water feature, that was deliberately buried when the mound was expanded around 1100 CE. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in 2003 revealed a rectangular depression measuring roughly 60 by 80 feet, with what appears to be a stone-lined bottom and possibly channels leading away from it. Core samples brought up clay layers stained with organic material and traces of charcoal, suggesting fire had played a role in whatever happened there. The leading theory? It was a ceremonial water court, similar to structures found at Mayan sites in Central America. These courts held shallow pools used for ritual games, astronomical observations reflected in still water, or symbolic representations of the underworld. The fact that Cahokia's builders would later bury such an important feature under millions of cubic feet of earth suggests either a dramatic religious transformation or a desire to seal away something dangerous or cursed. And here's where things get genuinely strange. Several of the core samples contained human remains, not formal burials, but isolated bones mixed with the soil fill. Forensic analysis dated these bones to roughly 1150 CE and revealed cut marks consistent with defleshing. Were these sacrificial victims? Political enemies? Honored dead whose bones were ritually incorporated into the sacred mound? Now let's be fair, not everyone buys the cursed burial interpretation. Many archaeologists argue the bones simply represent disturbance from earlier burials that got mixed into the fill dirt when workers were enlarging the mound. The cut marks could be from standard mortuary practices, not sacrifice. And the sunken plaza might have been nothing more than a foundation feature that got covered over as building plans evolved. But skepticism doesn't quite account for the sheer deliberateness of the burial process. Soil analysis shows the fill was carefully selected and layered, not just dumped haphazardly. Whatever they were covering up, they wanted it to stay covered. Adding fuel to the mystery fire, a Cherokee legend collected in the 1890s speaks of a drowned city where ancient chiefs built a mountain over their shame. The specific details are maddeningly vague. Was the shame a massacre? A failed ritual? A broken alliance? The storyteller didn't elaborate, and by the time anthropologists thought to ask follow-up questions, that generation had passed on. We're left with tantalizing fragments that may or may not connect to Cahokia. The Cherokee homeland was hundreds of miles to the east, but oral traditions can migrate with people, and 7 centuries is a long game of telephone for preserving accurate details. Close your eyes and imagine the scene. It's a humid summer night in 1100 CE, and the entire population of Cahokia has gathered around Monk's Mound. Torches flicker in the darkness. Drums echo from the summit. The paramount chief emerges from his palace, arms raised, pronouncing that the old plaza must be sealed away. Perhaps a plague has struck, and shamans have declared the space contaminated. Perhaps a rival faction attempted a coup, and their blood has polluted the sacred ground. Perhaps, and this is where we enter pure speculation, something was discovered in that sunken court that terrified the religious authorities, something that challenged their cosmology so profoundly that it had to be erased from history. Teams of workers begin the enormous task of filling in the plaza, bucket by bucket, sealing whatever secrets it holds beneath the weight of earth and time. What really lies beneath Monk's Mound? We still don't know. Full excavation would be monumentally expensive and would require dismantling a significant portion of the mound itself, something modern preservation ethics won't allow. The secrets are sealed, perhaps forever, under 100 feet of packed earth. Every once in a while, erosion or groundwater seepage opens a small window into the mound's interior, and archaeologists rush to document what they can before the opening closes again. But the big questions remain unanswered, and that sunken plaza continues to haunt researchers' dreams. Stretching 18 miles from Cahokia's eastern edge to a distant bluff line, Basibistupakim All Blackwine, the Rattlesnake Causeway represents one of the most ambitious engineering projects in pre-Columbian North America, and one of the most puzzling. Imagine a raised earthen road, roughly 60 feet wide, elevated several feet above the marshy floodplain to keep it passable even during spring floods. The Mississippians built this massive throughway around 1050 CE, moving thousands of tons of earth to create a permanent all-weather connection between their urban center and the upland forest where they harvested timber, hunted deer, and quite possibly conducted sacred rituals away from the bustling city. But here's what doesn't add up. The causeway doesn't take the most direct route to the bluffs. Instead, it curves and winds, adding miles to the journey, passing by several large mounds that seem to have been built specifically to mark points along the road. Why not just build straight? The standard archaeological explanation is that they were following natural high ground to minimize construction effort. But survey data shows that several stretches actually required more earth moving than a straight path would have. Some researchers have proposed the causeway doubles as an astronomical alignment, pointing towards specific sunrise or moonrise positions. Others suggest it was a processional route, where the journey itself was part of ritual practice. Pilgrims were meant to walk the winding path, stopping at each mound to perform ceremonies. The truly bizarre element emerged during excavations in 1995, when a team from the University of Wisconsin trenched a section of the causeway about 5 miles from Cahokia's center. Beneath the earthen fill, they found a layer of crushed mussel shells, millions of them, spread deliberately before the causeway was built. Midden analysis showed these shells came from freshwater mussels native to the Mississippi River, and they'd been harvested, meat removed, shells crushed, and spread as a foundation layer. The effort involved was staggering. Why go to such trouble? Crushed shell creates excellent drainage and a firm foundation, so there's a practical explanation, but the sheer volume suggests symbolic importance as well. Shells played a central role in Mississippian cosmology, representing water, the underworld, and journeys to the spirit realm. Now we need to talk about what was traveling along this causeway, because the cargo helps explain why Cahokia became so powerful. Excavations at the city have yielded artifacts from a mind-boggling range: copper from Lake Superior, mica from the Appalachian Mountains, shells from the Gulf Coast, obsidian from the Rocky Mountains, and galena, lead ore, from Missouri's Ozark Plateau. We're talking about trade networks spanning over 1,000 miles in every direction. Cahokia sat at the perfect hub location: the confluence of major rivers, the intersection of multiple ecological zones, the meeting point of different cultural groups. The causeway connected this hub to the hinterlands, allowing a steady flow of timber, game, and probably tribute from outlying communities. But some of the artifacts raise eyebrows and questions. In 1972, archaeologists uncovered a copper workshop near Monk's Mound, containing not just finished ornaments, but also what appeared to be incomplete experimental pieces, copper, formed into shapes that don't fit any known Mississippian artistic tradition. One piece looked remarkably like a simplified ship with a raised prow. Another seemed to show a human figure in profile, wearing what might be a beard. Unusual, since Native American men typically have minimal facial hair. These pieces were never formally published, and they've since disappeared into storage. But photographs exist, and they've fueled decades of speculation. Could Cahokia have had contact with Old World seafarers? The idea seems absurd at first. We're talking about 1000 CE, nearly 500 years before Columbus. But consider, Norse Vikings had established settlements in Newfoundland by 1000 CE. We have hard archaeological proof of this from L'Anse aux Meadows. Arab sailors were crossing the Indian Ocean routinely. Polynesian voyagers were colonizing the Pacific. The idea of transatlantic contact isn't as crazy as it sounds. The question is whether any such contact could have penetrated as far inland as Cahokia. 1,000 miles from the nearest ocean seems like a stretch, but trade networks are exactly how exotic ideas and artifacts move across vast distances without direct contact. A copper ship ornament could have passed through 20 different hands over 50 years before arriving in Cahokia, each owner not knowing where it ultimately came from. The counterargument is straightforward. Isolated similarities prove nothing. Humans independently invented pyramids, pottery, agriculture, and countless other technologies. A copper ship shape could be coincidence or a representation of the riverine canoes that were central to Cahokia's economy. The bearded figure could be a depiction of a person with a rare genetic condition or simply artistic license. Without more evidence, say Old World trade goods or biological markers, the exotic contact theory remains intriguing speculation rather than proven fact. Picture yourself as a trader arriving in Cahokia via the Rattlesnake Causeway after a 2-week journey from the Gulf Coast. Your canoe is loaded with conch shells, shark teeth, and dried fish. Your feet have walked the shell-paved road, stopping at each mound to leave small offerings. Now you enter the Grand Plaza, and the scale of the city hits you like a physical force. Thousands of homes stretch in all directions. The great Woodhenge stands to your left, its posts gleaming red in the afternoon sun. Monk's Mound looms ahead, impossibly tall, topped by a structure where smoke rises from sacred fires. This is the center of the world, the place where all paths converge. You're here to trade, but you're also here to witness power, to pay homage, to bring stories home about the city that touches the sky. What secrets traveled along the Rattlesnake Causeway? We still don't know. The road itself has largely been destroyed by modern agriculture and development. Only scattered segments remain, protected in small parks and nature preserves. Archaeologists would love to excavate more of it, to see if other sections hold surprises like that shell layer. But money is limited, time is short, and every year more of the causeway disappears beneath strip malls and subdivisions. The ancient highway is vanishing, taking its mysteries with it. About a half-mile south of Monk's Mound lies a ridgetop mound that almost didn't get excavated. Mound 72 was small compared to Cahokia's giants, just 6 feet tall and covering maybe 3,000 square feet. It looked unremarkable, and for years archaeologists drove past it on their way to bigger, more impressive features. But in 1967, Melvin Fowler decided to give it a proper dig before highway construction destroyed it forever. What he found inside rewrote the entire understanding of Mississippian society and raised disturbing questions that still haven't been answered. The primary burial, located in the center of the mound, contained 2 high-status males laid side by side on a platform of 20,000 shell beads, arranged to form the shape of a falcon. The symbolism was clear. The falcon warrior was the paramount war chief, or possibly a legendary hero, a figure of such importance that even in death he needed to be literally carried on the wings of a sacred bird. Buried with these men were hundreds of artifacts, sheets of mica cut into shapes, bundles of arrows with heads from different regions, showing tribute or alliance, copper pieces, and chunky stones used in a ritual ball game. The wealth and care invested in this burial marked it as something extraordinary, but that wasn't the disturbing part. As Fowler's team expanded the excavation, they found additional burials surrounding the central figures. First, they uncovered 4 men with no grave goods, their heads and hands removed, almost certainly sacrificed retainers or captives killed to accompany the falcon warrior into the afterlife. Then came a mass grave containing 53 young women, all between ages 15 and 25, all seemingly killed at once and buried together. Near them lay another mass grave with 39 men and women showing signs of malnutrition and trauma, possibly war captives or low-status individuals also sacrificed during the funeral ceremonies. The numbers are staggering. At least 272 individuals were buried in Mound 72, with the vast majority being apparent sacrificial victims. This represented a scale of human sacrifice that North American archaeology had never documented before. It forced an uncomfortable reckoning with the idea that Mississippian society might have been darker and more hierarchical than previously thought. The young women, in particular, haunted researchers. Were they wives or concubines? Were they volunteers seeking honor or victims with no choice? Forensic analysis showed no defensive wounds, suggesting they were either drugged, killed in their sleep, or went willingly. Some showed evidence of strangulation. Others may have been buried alive. Now let's pump the brakes on the bloodthirsty savages narrative that sometimes emerges from these findings. Human sacrifice wasn't unique to Cahokia. Ancient cultures worldwide, from Egypt to China to Mesoamerica, practiced it during certain periods. In societies where the afterlife was believed to be a real place, requiring servants and companions, sacrifice made a twisted kind of sense. It was religious logic, not random cruelty. The Mississippian worldview held that great leaders needed proper accompaniment on their journey to the spirit world, just as they needed retinues in life. Understanding the practice doesn't mean approving of it, but it does mean recognizing these were rational people operating within their own cultural framework, not monsters. Still, for all the explanations, something feels off about Mound 72. The sheer number of victims exceeds anything found at other Mississippian sites. Cahokia had a dozen other important burials, and none involved mass sacrifice on this scale. Why was the falcon warrior so special? Some archaeologists speculate he might have been a founding figure, a legendary leader whose funeral required extraordinary measures. Others wonder if the burial marks a crisis period, perhaps a plague or military defeat that triggered desperate ritual actions. A few researchers have even suggested the sacrifice victims weren't all killed at once, but accumulated over decades as the mound was used repeatedly, though soil stratigraphy doesn't really support that interpretation. Adding a mythic dimension to the mystery, several Native American oral traditions speak of tall ones, or ancient giants, who ruled before the current tribes arrived. The two central males in Mound 72 were both unusually tall for Mississippian people, one measuring close to 6'3", and their bones showed minimal arthritis despite advanced age, suggesting lives free from heavy labor. Were these men the historical basis for later giant legends? Probably not in a literal sense. They weren't actual giants, just taller than average. But in a society where most people stood 5'6" or less, a 6'3" warrior chief might have seemed godlike, especially after centuries of mythic inflation. Imagine the funeral procession, a cool October day in 1050 CE, the city in mourning. The falcon warrior has died, and his body lies in state atop Monk's Mound for 3 days, while people file past to pay respects. Then comes the procession to Mound 72, with thousands lining the route. The sacrificial victims, those young women, those captives, walk or are carried to the burial site. Maybe they're drugged with herbal concoctions to ensure compliance. Maybe they believe they're being honored, chosen to serve the great chief in the afterlife. The shell bead platform is already prepared, that massive falcon image waiting to receive its burden. The bodies are arranged with terrible precision. Earth begins to fall, bucket by bucket, sealing them forever in darkness. What really happened at Mound 72? We still don't know the full story. Modern Native American groups, particularly those with potential ancestral ties to Cahokia, have mixed feelings about the excavation and display of these remains. Some argue the victims deserve reburial and peace. Others believe studying them honors their memory by telling their story. It's a complex ethical debate with no easy answers. What's clear is that Mound 72 revealed a society capable of both breathtaking artistry and shocking violence. A civilization that was far more complex and morally ambiguous than simplified narratives allow. Around 1175 CE, the people of Cahokia did something that signaled trouble. They built a wall. Not a ceremonial marker, not a symbolic boundary, but a serious defensive fortification. A palisade consisting of 20,000 logs set in deep trenches, standing 15 feet tall, stretching 2 miles around the central precinct of the city. The wall enclosed Monk's Mound, the Grand Plaza, Woodhenge, and the elite residential areas, but left most of the city's population outside. This wasn't a city wall in the traditional sense. It was a citadel wall, designed to protect the ruling class from someone or something dangerous. Archaeological evidence shows the palisade was rebuilt at least 3 times over the next century, suggesting sustained threat. Each version incorporated bastions, projecting towers that allowed defenders to fire arrows along the wall face, sophisticated military architecture that implies genuine warfare, not just raiding. The question that haunts researchers: who was Cahokia afraid of? External enemies from rival chiefdoms, or internal revolt from their own subjugated population? The conventional interpretation favors external threats. By 1150 CE, Cahokia's power had peaked and begun to decline. Climate data shows a shift toward cooler, drier conditions that would have stressed the agricultural base. Trade networks appear to have contracted. Outlying communities stopped sending tribute. In this context, the wall makes sense as a defensive measure against rival groups seeing opportunity in Cahokia's weakness. Maybe neighboring chiefdoms, jealous of Cahokia's former dominance, were pressing their advantage. Maybe nomadic groups from the plains were raiding with increasing boldness. But there's another interpretation that's harder to dismiss. The wall might represent elite fear of their own people. Remember, Mound 72 showed us a society with extreme social hierarchy and human sacrifice. The labor demands for building. The mounds, maintaining the trade networks, and supporting a non-productive priestly class must have been enormous. What if the lower classes got tired of shouldering that burden? What if a peasant revolt or religious schism threatened the power structure? The fact that the wall excluded most of the city's population could support this reading. The elites were literally walling themselves off from everyone else. And then, mysteriously, it all ended. By 1350 CE, Cahokia was essentially abandoned. The population didn't decline gradually. It collapsed. Within a few generations, a city of 10 to 20,000 shrank to nothing. People didn't just move to the outskirts, they left entirely, dispersing into small villages scattered across the region. When European explorers finally reached the area in the 1600s, the Great Mounds stood empty and overgrown, and local tribes had only vague legends about who had built them. What caused this abandonment? Theories abound, none entirely satisfying. Environmental degradation is popular, the theory that Cahokia literally consumed its resource base, cutting down all nearby forests for timber and fuel, exhausting the soil through intensive agriculture, driving away game through overhunting. There's evidence for all of this. Pollen cores show dramatic forest clearance, soil studies show erosion and nutrient depletion, and faunal remains suggest a shift from large game to smaller, less desirable species over time. A self-inflicted eco-catastrophe would explain both the palisade, increased resource competition leading to warfare, and the abandonment. The land simply couldn't support a city anymore. Climate change plays into this. Paleoclimate data from tree rings and sediment cores indicates the period 1200–1350 CE saw increased droughts and crop failures across the Midwest. If you're already stressing your environment, and then a 50-year drought hits, the system can collapse completely. People had to move to survive, but this doesn't explain why they never came back. Climate recovered eventually, yet Cahokia remained abandoned. Why? Here's where we enter murkier territory. Some researchers propose a religious or ideological crisis. The Mississippian worldview was built around elite priest chiefs who mediated with the gods, controlled the weather, ensured good harvests. What happens when the crops fail despite all the rituals, when the gods seem to have abandoned you? The entire belief system could collapse, taking the political structure with it. Maybe people concluded that Cahokia was cursed, that the human sacrifices and monument building had angered rather than appeased the spirits. Maybe prophets arose preaching a return to older, simpler ways, and the population dispersed voluntarily to escape a condemned place. Lenape and Shawnee oral traditions include stories about an evil city where the earth drank blood and the sky turned away, which might preserve folk memory of Cahokia's decline. The details are frustratingly nonspecific, but the emotional tenor is clear. Something bad happened here, something that poisoned the land and drove people away. Whether that evil was ecological collapse, epidemic disease, for which we have limited evidence, social disintegration, or something else entirely, remains open to debate. Picture the last days of Cahokia. It's 1340 CE, and the Grand Plaza stands mostly empty. Weeds grow between the carefully laid stones. The palisade is rotting, no one bothering to repair it anymore. On Monk's Mound, a handful of old priests maintain the sacred fires, but fewer people come to offer tribute. The Woodhenge posts lean at crazy angles, some already toppled. Young people talk about leaving, about joining relatives in distant villages where life is simpler, harder maybe, but free from the suffocating demands of the city. One by one, families pack up and go. The elite try to hold them, then try to convince them, then finally leave themselves, taking the sacred objects and secrets to wherever they settle next. Within a generation, only ghosts remain. Why did Cahokia fall? We still don't know for certain. The evidence points to a perfect storm: environmental stress, climate change, social upheaval, possibly disease, all hitting simultaneously. But the speed and completeness of the collapse suggests something more, some breaking point that went beyond simple hardship. Civilizations can endure drought and war. They can adapt and survive. For everyone to give up and walk away, the center had to fail utterly. Whatever that failure was, it erased one of North America's greatest cities from living memory. 60 miles south of Cahokia, on a high bluff overlooking the Mississippi River, sits a smaller but equally mysterious site that archaeologists call the Emerald Acropolis, a modern name, since we have no idea what the original inhabitants called it. Discovered during a survey in 1978 and excavated sporadically since then, this complex consisted of 3 large platform mounds arranged in a precise equilateral triangle, each side measuring exactly 300 feet. The geometric precision alone raises questions, but what really baffles researchers is what they found on top of the southern mound, a structure whose floor was paved with sheets of mica. Mica, for those unfamiliar, is a silicate mineral that splits into thin, transparent, or translucent sheets. It's beautiful, reflective, and has no obvious practical function in construction. It's a ceremonial or decorative material. The Mississippian people valued mica highly and traded it across vast distances from sources in the Appalachian Mountains, 600 miles to the east. Finding mica at a Mississippian site isn't unusual. Finding over 2,000 square feet of it carefully cut and laid as flooring is unprecedented. The building itself measured roughly 40 by 60 feet, with massive post foundations suggesting a tall, impressive structure. Burned daub, clay, plaster, found in the collapsed layer preserved impressions of woven wall mats decorated with intricate designs. But it's the mica floor that dominates discussion. When the excavation team first uncovered it in 1981, the sheets still retained some flexibility and transparency, after centuries buried in clay soil. The lead archaeologist, Susan Murtay, described walking onto the excavation platform and seeing the entire floor shimmer in the sunlight, like a pool of silver water. Why build a floor from mica? The practical explanation is that mica is waterproof and durable, but you don't need 2,000 square feet of it for waterproofing. You could achieve the same effect with clay or stone at a fraction of the cost and labor. No, this was about visual effect, about creating a space that was literally otherworldly. Imagine entering this building at night with torches burning. The mica floor would reflect and multiply the light, making it seem like you were walking on captured starlight or standing atop a pool of water. The psychological impact would be immense. Now here's where things get weird. Among the mica sheets, excavators found copper spangles, small, thin discs of hammered copper, perforated for attachment, scattered in patterns that don't seem random. Murtaugh's team painstakingly mapped each spangle's location before lifting the mica, and when they analyzed the pattern, it appeared to show constellation groupings, specifically what might be Orion and Ursa Major, prominent star patterns visible in the Mississippian night sky. If this interpretation is correct, the floor represented a map of the heavens, with copper stars set in a mica sky. Priests or chiefs standing in this room would literally be standing in the cosmos, positioned between earth and sky, mediating between worlds. The skeptical response is predictable. Humans see patterns everywhere, especially when looking for them. The copper spangles might have been sewn onto a fabric or hide covering that disintegrated, and their current positions could be random scatters from that collapse. Without additional evidence, say markings on the mica itself or written records, which don't exist, the star map interpretation remains unprovable. But the alternative explanation doesn't quite fit either. The spangles were found directly on the mica, beneath the collapsed debris, not mixed in with it. Their distribution isn't uniform or random. It shows clear clustering. Something intentional was happening here. Adding another layer of mystery, the Emerald Acropolis shows signs of catastrophic destruction. All 3 mounds were burned simultaneously sometime around 1200 CE. Not gradual abandonment, but deliberate destruction. Charcoal layers are thick and extensive, suggesting fires hot enough and long enough to consume every wooden structure. No evidence of battle or conquest has been found. No weapon caches, no mass graves, no signs of looting. This looks like ritual destruction, the site being deliberately decommissioned and burned, possibly by its own inhabitants. Why would they destroy such an important ceremonial center? One theory holds that the mica floor building was the site of a failed prophecy or disastrous ritual. If the priests standing on that celestial floor promised something, victory in war, abundant harvest, protection from disease, and it didn't happen, the entire religious system could be discredited. Burning the temples and abandoning the site would represent a clean break, a rejection of the failed gods. It sounds dramatic, but there are historical parallels. The Anasazi abandoned major centers like Chaco Canyon under similar mysterious circumstances, leaving behind burned great houses and empty plazas. Cherokee medicine men, in interviews conducted in the 1920s, referenced sky rooms, where light lived in stone, and where ancient priests walked among stars. The descriptions are vague enough to apply to many things, but the specific mention of light and stone feels tantalizing. Could these stories preserve memory of the mica floor? The Cherokee homeland was far to the east, but oral traditions can travel, especially if refugees from abandoned sites like the Emerald Acropolis fled into Cherokee territory, bringing their stories with them. Close your eyes and step into that mica-floored temple on a clear winter night. Torches flicker in iron braziers. The mica beneath your feet catches every spark and multiplies it into a constellation of reflections. Above you, the actual stars shine through smoke holes in the roof. You're standing in a space that confuses the boundary between Earth and cosmos, inside and outside, mortal and divine. The priests are chanting in a language you barely understand, an ancient tongue preserved only for these ceremonies. Copper stars gleam at your feet. For a moment, you believe, really believe, that you're somewhere sacred, somewhere that connects to powers beyond ordinary comprehension. What happened in that temple? We still don't know. The mica sheets were too fragile to preserve once exposed to air, and they disintegrated within months of excavation despite desperate attempts at conservation. Photographs and detailed drawings exist, but the physical material is gone. The copper spangles sit in a museum drawer, tantalizing evidence of something. But what? The site itself has been reburied to protect it, with only discrete markers showing where the mounds once stood. The mysteries of the Emerald Acropolis remain sealed beneath the earth, and perhaps that's how they were meant to end, in fire and silence. Nearly 400 miles southwest of Cahokia, on a bend of the Arkansas River in what's now eastern Oklahoma, sits a complex called Spiro Mounds, one of the most important and most looted Mississippian sites ever discovered. Between 800 and 1450 CE, this community of perhaps 2,000 people served as a critical trade hub connecting Cahokia and the wider Mississippian world to the Plains tribes to the west and the Caddoan peoples to the south. But Spiro is most famous for what was found in one particular mound in 1933, a discovery that ranks among the great and most tragic archaeological finds of the 20th century. The mound in question, called Craig Mound, was a large conical structure about 30 feet tall. In 1933, a group of local treasure hunters calling themselves the Pecola Mining Company bought digging rights from the landowner for $100 and began tunneling into the mound. What they found inside was staggering. A massive hollow chamber, about 15 feet in diameter and 10 feet tall, packed almost to the roof with artifacts. Thousands upon thousands of objects, shell gorgets, copper plates, stone effigy pipes, elaborate textiles, wooden masks, basketry, pearls, ceremonial maces, and most spectacularly, hundreds of engraved conch shells showing scenes of Mississippian mythology and daily life. The looters worked for months, hauling out wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow of priceless artifacts and selling them to collectors and dealers across the country. By the time archaeologists learned what was happening and convinced the state to intervene, the damage was done. The chamber, which had remained sealed and oxygen-free for centuries, preserving organic materials that normally would have rotted away, was opened and exposed. Textiles disintegrated. Wooden objects dried out and cracked. Context was completely destroyed as objects were mixed, scattered, and separated from the matrix that might have told us when they were deposited and why. Despite the disaster, what survived is extraordinary. The engraved shells particularly stand out. These were large marine conch shells, often 10 to 12 inches across, carved with intricate scenes using techniques that must have taken hundreds of hours per shell. The images show warriors in elaborate regalia, priests conducting ceremonies, mythological figures, birdmen, serpents, figures with multiple heads, and geometric patterns of stunning complexity. These shells were likely used as ceremonial drinking cups during important rituals, with the engraved images serving as visual texts communicating mythology and history. Here's what makes them truly bizarre. Some of the iconography appears to show influence from Mesoamerican cultures, particularly the Maya and Toltec. Several shells depict feathered serpents, a central figure in Mexican mythology but rare in Mississippian imagery. One famous shell shows a figure wearing a turban-like headdress and carrying what looks remarkably like a Mesoamerican atlatl, spear thrower, rather than the bow and arrow typical of Mississippian warriors. Another shows a ball court scene that seems more Maya than Mississippian, though chunky courts were important in Mississippian culture too. Did Spiro's inhabitants have direct contact with Mesoamerica? The distance is enormous, over 1,000 miles from Spiro to the nearest Maya site. But trade networks in the ancient Americas were extensive. Macaw feathers from Mexico have been found at Mississippian sites. Turquoise, from the American Southwest, shows up throughout the region. Ideas and art styles can travel even farther than goods. It's entirely possible that a shell carver at Spiro was working from sketches or descriptions brought by traders who had traveled to Mexico, or from Mexican objects that made their way north through multiple exchanges. The skeptical position argues that the similarities are superficial or coincidental. Feathered serpents and elaborate headdresses aren't unique to Mesoamerica. Human cultures worldwide create similar imagery independently. The ball court might be a chunky court misidentified. Without harder evidence, say Mexican trade goods or actual Mexican people buried at Spiro, the connection remains speculative. Fair enough. But the sheer volume of suggestive similarities makes you wonder. When you see a dozen different Mesoamerican-style elements showing up at one site, coincidence starts to feel less satisfying as an explanation. Adding to the intrigue, one of the engraved shells shows what appears to be a map, a bird's-eye view of a region with rivers, mountains, and structures marked. For decades, researchers assumed it was a stylized mythological landscape, not a real place. But in 2008, a geographer named James Schurz proposed that the shell actually depicts the confluence of the Mississippi and Ohio rivers, with the structures representing major Mississippian mound centers. If he's right, it would be one of the earliest maps of North America, and evidence that Mississippian people had a continent-wide geographic awareness, able to mentally visualize and represent vast territories. Picture yourself as a high-ranking trader from Spiro, making the long journey to Cahokia for a diplomatic meeting. You carry gifts including several of those magnificent engraved shells, each one a masterpiece representing months of a master carver's labor. When you present them to Cahokia's paramount chief, you're not just giving objects. You're transmitting culture, telling stories, establishing alliances. The chief drinks ceremonial black drink from one of the shells, and as he raises it to his lips, He sees the engraved birdman warrior looking back at him. He understands the message. Spiro is powerful, sophisticated, connected. The shell speaks a visual language both leaders understand, bridging the hundreds of miles between their cities. What secrets do those shells hold? We still don't know the full meaning of many scenes. Without a Rosetta Stone or living cultural memory, we're left interpreting images through our own cultural lenses, which is dangerous. Every few years, a new scholar proposes a radical reinterpretation of the shell iconography, and sometimes it sticks, sometimes it doesn't. The tragedy is that the archaeological context, what was, buried with what, in what order, with what other objects, was destroyed by those 1933 looters. Properly excavated, that chamber might have answered dozens of questions. Instead, we have beautiful, haunting objects stripped of their full story, scattered in museums and private collections across the world. Our final mystery takes us underground, literally. In 1891, a farmer named Jacob Weiss was digging a well on his property, 15 miles east of Cahokia, when his shovel broke through into a hidden void. Shining his lantern into the darkness, he discovered a limestone cave system that extended deep into the bluff. Being a practical man, Weiss figured he'd found a good root cellar and didn't think much more about it. But when he climbed down to explore, he found the cave floor littered with human bones, pottery shards, and dozens of clear quartz crystals, some as large as a man's fist. Word got to the Smithsonian, and in 1893, archaeologists conducted a brief excavation before the site was sealed. Their report, published in 1894, describes a series of connected chambers extending over 300 feet into the limestone, with evidence of at least 43 individuals buried within. But these weren't ordinary burials. The bodies had been placed in seated or crouching positions, clustered around collections of crystal formations. Some of the crystals were natural growths from the cave walls, others had been brought in from elsewhere. The archaeologists noted that several skulls that showed unusual morphology, elongated craniums that might indicate intentional head binding, a practice known from some southeastern Native American groups. The report generated immediate controversy. In the 1890s, racist pseudo-archaeology was rampant, with theorists claiming that advanced Native American sites must have been built by lost European or Middle Eastern tribes. The crystal cave burials became fodder for these theories, with some claiming the elongated skulls proved the individuals were European or Phoenician or even Atlantean refugees. Modern analysis of photographs from the original excavation shows the skulls are within the normal range of human variation, possibly with some cultural cranial modification, but not evidence of any lost race. What's genuinely mysterious about the crystal cave burials is their treatment of the crystals. Quartz isn't rare in this region. Limestone caves often contain crystal formations, but the sheer concentration and apparent organization suggests ritual importance. Some crystals had been intentionally placed in the mouths of the dead. Others were arranged in circular patterns around the bodies. A few showed evidence of grinding or shaping, as if being prepared for use as tools or ornaments. In Mississippian cosmology, crystals were associated with purity, clarity, and spiritual power. Shamans used crystals in divination and healing rituals. Finding them in a burial context makes sense. The dead were being equipped for the spirit journey. But here's the truly strange part. Carbon dating of organic material from the cave, conducted in the 1970s on specimens preserved by the Smithsonian, yielded dates clustering around 400–600 CE, roughly 400 years before Cahokia's peak. This wasn't a Cahokian burial site. It predated the major Mississippian culture. Yet the pottery styles and burial practices show clear continuity with later Mississippian patterns. The Crystal Cave people were either ancestors of the Cahokians, or at least part of the cultural tradition that eventually produced Cahokia. Why bury people underground in a crystal-filled cave rather than in the more typical above-ground mounds? The most compelling theory is that the cave represented the underworld in a literal sense. Many Native American cosmologies describe a three-tiered universe: the upper world, sky heaven; the middle world, ordinary earth; and the lower world, cave, water, death. By placing the dead in an actual cave, surrounded by crystals that captured and refracted whatever dim light penetrated the depths, the living were symbolically ensuring the deceased reached the proper realm of the afterlife. It was elaborate theater, a physical dramatization of religious belief. Modern descendants of Mississippian peoples, particularly the Osage and Caddo nations, have complex feelings about the Crystal Cave excavations. For decades, the remains sat in Smithsonian storage, along with thousands of other Native American burials excavated in the name of science. The Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, NAGPRE, passed in 1990, mandated the return of such remains to affiliated tribes for reburial. The Crystal Cave bones were repatriated in 2003 and reburied in a private ceremony. The crystals themselves were considered culturally sensitive objects and also returned, to be disposed of according to tribal protocols. The site itself is now under private ownership and off-limits. The entrance was permanently sealed with concrete in the 1960s after vandals tried to break in looking for treasure. If you knew exactly where to look, you could probably still find the spot: a nondescript limestone bluff overlooking the Mississippi floodplain, with a few old cedars clinging to the rocky soil. Nothing marks it as special anymore. The cave is dark again, sealed, perhaps for the last time. Whatever other secrets it holds, deeper chambers, additional artifacts, more burials, will likely remain undiscovered forever. Imagine you're a young initiate in 450 CE, being led by lantern light into that cave for the first time. The opening is narrow, forcing you to crawl, and then suddenly the passage widens into a cathedral-like chamber. Your lantern light catches the crystals, and they explode into points of brilliance, a galaxy of stars inside the earth. The bones of ancestors sit in their eternal circles, watching over these crystals that connect the worlds. Your shaman tells you that this is where the dead go, that when your time comes, you too will sit in the darkness with the stars at your feet. You're terrified and awed in equal measure. This isn't just a burial site, it's a portal, a threshold between life and death made physically real. What did those crystals mean to the people who placed them? We still don't know the full answer. Ethnographic accounts from the 1800s describe various Native American groups using crystals in healing and divination, but specific ritual details were closely guarded secrets, not shared with outsider anthropologists. The Crystal Cave remains a tantalizing glimpse into belief systems that were already ancient when Cahokia was built, practices that connected earth and sky, life and death, through the simple beauty of stone that captured light. For the last hour, we've walked together through the ruins and mysteries of ancient North America, exploring sites that challenge everything we thought we knew about pre-Columbian civilization. From Cahokia's massive Woodhenge and its undeciphered copper tablets to the horrifying mass burials of Mound 72, from the enigmatic Rattlesnake Causeway stretching 18 miles through swampland to the shimmering mica floors of the Emerald Acropolis, from Spiro's looted treasures showing possible Mesoamerican contact to the Crystal Cave's underground burials surrounded by quartz. We've encountered puzzle after puzzle, question after question, mystery after mystery, and the honest truth is, we still don't have all the answers. We may never have all the answers. But that's not failure. That's the human condition. Every civilization leaves behind more questions than it answers, more shadows than light. The people of Cahokia and the wider Mississippian world built monuments that rivaled anything in Europe or Asia during the same period. They created art of stunning beauty, developed astronomical knowledge sophisticated enough to track celestial cycles, established trade networks spanning thousands of miles, and constructed cities that housed tens of thousands. They were engineers, astronomers, artists, warriors, and dreamers. They were us, separated only by time and circumstance. What happened to them matters because it's part of our shared story. The conventional narrative of American history starts with Columbus in 1492, as if nothing important existed before European arrival. That narrative erases the achievements and struggles of millions of people who lived, loved, built, and died on this continent for thousands of years before any European ship touched shore. Cahokia alone proves that narrative wrong. You can't look at Monk's Mound, larger at its base than the Great Pyramid, and maintain the fiction that pre-Columbian America was empty wilderness waiting for civilization to arrive. The civilization was already here. It rose, it flourished, it fell, and it left behind mysteries that still speak to us if we're willing to listen. Some of those mysteries may never be solved. We'll probably never know what the copper tablets under Woodhenge really say, or exactly why those 53 young women were sacrificed at Mound 72, or what catastrophe drove Cahokia's population to abandon their city so completely. The mica floors have disintegrated, the timber circles have rotted away, and the people who could tell us the truth have been dust for 7 centuries. But in another sense, the mystery itself is valuable. It reminds us that human history is deeper and stranger than we imagine, that our ancestors were capable of both greatness and horror, wisdom and folly, just as we are. The mythic elements we've encountered, the giants, the cursed temples, the ancient voyagers possibly arriving from distant lands. These stories matter too, even if they're not literally true. They represent how later peoples tried to make sense of the ruins around them, how they incorporated the physical evidence of vanished civilizations into their own mythologies and worldviews. When the Osage speak of sky watchers, when the Cherokee tell of drowned cities, they're preserving cultural memory in the only way oral tradition allows, through metaphor, through story, through the careful passing of knowledge from generation to generation, even as specific details blur and transform. We should respect those stories even as we apply scientific methods to uncover the physical reality beneath them. And here's what's exciting: the discoveries aren't over. Every year brings new archaeological findings, new technologies that let us peer beneath the earth without digging, new interdisciplinary collaborations that connect climatology, astronomy, genetics, linguistics, and archaeology into more complete pictures of the past. That sunken plaza beneath Monk's Mound is still down there, waiting. The deeper chambers of the Crystal Cave remain sealed and unexplored. Thousands of smaller sites across the Midwest and Southeast have never been properly excavated. Every one of them holds potential answers and potential new questions. So what do we do with these mysteries? We keep investigating, keep questioning, keep refusing to accept easy answers or simplified narratives. We fund archaeological research, support indigenous cultural preservation, protect sites from development and looting, and educate ourselves about the deep history of the lands we inhabit. We recognize that prehistory is a misleading term. These people had history, rich and complex, even if they didn't write it down in ways we immediately recognize. Their history is our history. Their mysteries are our mysteries. Their achievements reflect human potential, and their failures warn us about human fragility. The most profound mystery isn't any specific artifact or site. It's the question of how we remember and honor the past while living in the present. Those Mississippian people who stood in Woodhenge watching the solstice sunrise, who climbed Monk's Mound to commune with the gods, who crafted those beautiful engraved shells, who were buried with crystals in dark caves. They were reaching towards something larger than themselves, trying to understand their place in the cosmos, seeking meaning in a confusing and sometimes terrifying world. We're doing exactly the same thing, just with different tools and different questions. Across 7 centuries, across cultural divides, across the gulf between living memory and archaeological reconstruction, we recognize ourselves in them. And that recognition, that shared humanity, is worth more than any artifact we might dig up. Keep digging, literally and metaphorically. Keep asking questions about the ruins and mysteries around you. Support the archaeologists and indigenous scholars doing the hard work of uncovering and interpreting these sites. Visit Cahokia if you can. It's now a UNESCO World Heritage Site and State Historic Park, with reconstructed Woodhenge and interpretive trails that let you walk where those ancient city dwellers walked. Stand atop Monk's Mound and look out over the floodplain and try to imagine it as it was. A bustling city, smoke rising from thousands of cook fires, canoes plying the rivers, the thunder of drums echoing from the plazas during ceremony. Feel the weight of what was lost and the excitement of what we're still discovering. Some secrets still lie just beneath your feet. Maybe you'll be the one to find the next great mystery or to solve one of the old ones. Maybe you'll be the scholar who finally deciphers those copper tablets, or the geophysicist whose new imaging technique reveals what's really under Monk's Mound, or the linguist who connects Mississippian symbols to surviving Native American languages. Or maybe you'll just be someone who listens to these stories, who learns this history, and who refuses to let it be forgotten. That's enough. That's everything. Because in the end, the greatest mystery and the greatest achievement is memory itself, the audacious human insistence that what has passed matters, that the dead speak to the living, and that 7 centuries of silence can be broken by those willing to listen. The mounds are waiting. The stories are waiting. The mysteries are waiting. Go find them.